I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Mr. Lance of the organization here, and I really appreciate all the organizers for doing it. I want to thank all the people at my dear, not my alma mater, but it should be, at Marist, who have done so much to help set this up. And I hope that we can make this somewhat interactive because, frankly, I don't normally do this. So if you have any questions, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions throughout as well. One thing I want to ask you is how many people have a cell phone or a BlackBerry? Raise your hands. How many have both, a cell phone and a BlackBerry? Okay, a few of you. Okay, good. I hope that you feel that you can keep them off for at least a period of time. Anyway, what I want to talk about is leadership, and it's a term that's elusive, frankly. There's different forms of leadership, as we'll discuss, and different ways you do it. There is some validity to the approach and that was actually lifted from several of Patton's speeches that he gave to various troops throughout the African and European theaters. And there is some validity to it, but I think it may not in other circumstances, okay? As you can tell, there's a time for that. There's a time for, hey, we're doing it, and this is what we're going to do. Somebody has to pull the trigger. And you guys are generally the recipients of the pulling the trigger. And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, I've thought about it, and I thought about several categories of leadership, and there's the Patton way, which is command and control, do or die. We're going to advance on the enemy, and by golly, if we lose a few of you guys, that's too bad, that's the way we're going. There's creative, which washes over you guys, and it's washed over several entities that I'm involved in and have been. Operational is dealing with statistics, data, cost, productivity, and this is where you guys come in as well, because graphing it, showing it, calibrating it, and then being able to make decisions based on it is very important. Political, well, depends what party you're in or what party you don't want to be in, but that's a whole different set of values and approaches, and some people are very good at it, and some are not so good at it. Philanthropic, this is where a lot of this has to wash and be a part of philanthropic. Giving effectively is very, very difficult. Any of you who have done any charitable work of any kind, and when you tithe to your church, all of that giving has to be done intelligently. If you all stand out in the corner and hand out $50 bills, it may be considered charity, but it may not be very, very effective. And then we have managerial, which is kind of a top level, which is where you've got to manage the corporate coffers, you've got to answer to shareholders, you've got a fiduciary duty to your employees, you've got a fiduciary duty to the communities you work in, and it also deals with kind of broad strategic issues as well. Now, I've been fortunate, I've lived a very interesting life, I've done a lot of different things, a lot of different areas that required all sorts of different touches on different things, and we're going to address a bunch of these. I will tell you that the Marist, being on the Marist board, and especially being a former chair, it gave me a renewed sense of what it's like to herd cats, because the people on the board are smart, committed, opinionated, and because of that, you have to kind of gather them up and kind of softly, they also contribute, so that's an aspect of it, the philanthropic part. You have to kind of guide with a touch that kind of gets everybody moving, driving to a decision without necessarily forcing the decision. All right, let's go to the first one. This is a great, great quote. How many of you agree to that? Anybody agree to that? The guys in the front know what's going better than the guys in the rear? Would you guys agree with that? I mean, you guys sitting in the back row, I know you guys got here early and you sat in the back row. That's the way I used to do it in school. Can't blame you. But seriously, think about it. The boots on the ground that are on the front lines of whatever project or issue or anything, the people that are doing including the people that do the data collection to feed the system that you guys designed, they know more than the guys in the head office about a lot of issues. In fact, one of the interesting things about it, there was a fellow named Blumenthal who was the chief negotiator for the United Auto Workers in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s. And he said that the American car industry would not have gotten into the trouble that they did if only they had allowed the workers to tell the engineers and the product designers and the senior level management how to build cars. And guess how the Japanese do it? The workers have as much input into the design of building cars as the designers, engineers, marketing people, and senior management. And why? Because a guy that's putting a screw into the fender can show you 6 ways you can do it better. And that's what this says. And that's one of the things that as a senior level manager, I talk regularly in my businesses. I talk regularly to the people who I talk to all the shipping, the head of the shipping department at every one of my businesses. I talk to them at least once a month. Why? That's where the rubber hits the road. Because I can understand what's going on in the business when I hear what they're doing. But that's not what we're going to talk about next.
101.5 WPDH.
Now, if you want to talk about a business that is herding cats and trying to unify a creative sense, I'll tell you about PDH. This was the first business I got involved in. I was concerned about joining the family business for a lot of reasons. To some degree, it's a little bit difficult being the boss's son, but the other thing is I didn't know anything. What could I have brought to the party? So I had heard that I was in the radio business in Marietta, Ohio. I worked for the college radio station my first 2 years, then I worked for a commercial radio station my junior and senior years, and in Marietta, Ohio. And one of the things that I heard about this station being for sale, and so I worked a deal, spent a little money, borrowed a lot of money to start the radio station, which was then WEOK, AM and FM. We changed the FM to a country radio station in 1975, and I was sitting there listening to this country music, and it was automated, which meant that it was all on tapes. And I said, I'm not even listening to this stuff. I mean, I wanted rock and roll. So I looked around for a guy that made rock and roll tapes, and we started an automated rock and roll radio station in this region. In those days, just to show you, and a lot of you look too young, but some of you more senior guys will remember, and women will remember WABC. WABC used to be a music station. Now I don't know what they're doing, but they used to be they were the dominant rock and roll station in this region. They had a great signal with dominant. We had to go after them. And I had a lot of people in the organization who, shortly after we did this, kind of started getting weaned out because this was a real change, going to rock and roll. and we created WPDH. And as we went from automation to totally live, which it still is, that also created issues. But the biggest thing on this deal was, what was I thinking? That was one of the sales guys that was with me, who was absolutely against selling rock and roll. He could not believe that rock and roll was going to work in this area. And he said to me, "What were you thinking?" As soon as we switched this, he came into my office and said, "I can't believe it. What were you thinking?" So I told him what I was thinking. I don't listen to the station. And I'm a demographic that you want because you've got a whole lot of people that we're not getting anywhere. And this was the beginning, in 1976, this was the beginning of a whole lot of really great rock and roll came out. And you all can get your iPads or iPods and figure it out. So what we had to do was, the expectation was we were going to do great. And the reality, what I had to do, my personal responsibility, was to make sure that the reality met the expectations. So how did we do it? We made a commitment that we were going to treat the listeners with respect, that we were not going to talk down to our listeners. That was the first thing. We were not going to make fake names for people. It wasn't, Johnny Walker or any number of, Bill O'Neill was a big name in radio. There were Bill O'Neills across the country. What their real name, Harvey Feinbaum might have been the guy's real name. I said, we're not doing that either. Our people are going to be identified by who they are, and they are not going to talk down to listeners. And then the other thing was, we had to get a moniker for everybody to understand easily and quickly where we are, who we are, what we do. And we sat around figuring out this slogan. Tim Massey, who was head of PR and all of the external relations for the college, Tim was working for us then. And we went through a lot of effort to figure out, what are we going to say to people? Now, I can tell you, we had a lot of people giving input to that. And finally, one of the sales guys came up and said, let's be the home of rock and roll. Remember? And we started saying, we're the home of rock and roll. When I first put the station on the air, I put up billboards. I put up WPDH, and it had a spectrum of colors. I mean, it was the most useless billboard around. All it did was say WPDH FM and these rainbow lines. Remember that? And what it was is it really said nothing. But what it did was it started to get people thinking. And then we went to the home of rock and roll quite by chance about a few months later. And off we went. Now here's what we needed. We needed the creative herding cats routine. Come on, guys, we've got to figure out what we're going to do. And I'm telling you, it changed almost every day. When we saw something worked, we did it. If it didn't work, we threw it out. Operational, we had to keep track of our costs. That's why we were automated, and as we started with a live morning show, and then we started with an afternoon, evening drive show. So the two drive times, which is the most important time in radio, the two drive times, that we had to make live. And then we had the managerial, which was, come on, guys, this is a decision, we're going to go for it. And it also meant that we had to move some people out. This is in essence what this was compared to the old company that I had bought in 74, going to 76. What it was frankly a technology change. It was the equivalent of a technology change. Some people adjust to changes in anything, but some people adjust more than others. Some people say, is this a threat or an opportunity? And it comes right down to that. Is it a threat or is it an opportunity? And the people that felt it was an opportunity did remarkably well. I had salespeople making six-figure incomes because they saw it as an opportunity. I saw some people leave me because we were doing rock and roll, because they didn't like rock and roll, and they went to other radio stations. And look what they missed out on. I guarantee you, they weren't making six figures, and they never did. And that's the difference between that's kind of a career choice. But it also shows you that you can either bend or break. And it's not going with the flow. It's recognizing what's a good opportunity and what isn't. And it's all in here. It's all in here. So PDH was actually one of the more interesting endeavors I got into. And the reason why is because it covered so much ground in so many ways, and they just celebrated their 35th anniversary. We started up on June 5th, and on June 5th they did a 35th anniversary. This is one of the few radio stations in the country that A, has maintained its dominance in the market, and B, has done it with the same format. And it's still the home of rock and roll. I'm pretty proud of that. But it took all of that. And it continues to take all of that. All righty, Steve. I was up in Kingston the other day, and we passed by a library that Andrew Carnegie had built that they are converting into an adjunct to the high school. Andrew Carnegie built libraries. And what a great man he was. He exploited workers, however, and he created somewhat unsafe work environments. He didn't like unionization, but he went on to do all of what he's known for, which is philanthropic, by the way. But at least he made up for some of the sins that he did with what he did in his later life. Intelligent giving. This is a picture of the initial work. How many people have been on the... Now, I know, how many of you all are from right around the Poughkeepsie area? How many of you are? Oh, quite a few of you. How many of you have been on the walkway? Oh, good, okay. So a lot of you have been on the walkway. If you haven't, before you go, if you're from out of town, please spend an hour before you leave, literally from here. You can almost walk from here, but it's easy to get to. Any of the people with the Marist red shirts can direct you there. Go on the walkway, because it is a perfect example of intelligent giving and also sticking your neck out a little. But this is a picture of kind of the groundbreaking. This is what the walkway was. And this goes from here 1.2 miles that way. This was a bridge that was built in 1888. Andrew Carnegie, in fact, was one of the board members. That's why the bridge hasn't collapsed, because he was the board member. They bought a lot of Carnegie steel. Thank God they did, because we were able to do what we did, and that's why I urge you, if you haven't been on it, please do it. But the biggest thing on this is intelligent giving. When my parents started the Dyson Foundation, and all my family's involved in it, when they started the Dyson Foundation, they did it because they didn't have a lot of money then. But they did it because they had more money than a lot of the people that they knew, and they had a lot more money than they used to have. And they started the Dyson Foundation because they felt that it was a good idea to give back. Now that's what started it. That's what started it. But the biggest thing that in here, that's my parents, by the way, both lived a wonderful life, great people. The biggest thing you've got to understand is that if you give money, it has some impact. And I urge you, by the way, to give money to charitable causes, whatever your choice is, because it's incredibly rewarding. And being information officers, a lot of charitable endeavors need technical help. Computerizing their records, computerizing their billing, computerizing their payroll. So if you have some time and there's a local charitable organization, believe me, they need technical help, because we see it every day. In fact, we have a full-time staff member that does nothing but go around to the different emulsionary organizations that we give to, and some that we don't, to help them out with their technology. The philanthropic end of it is, you have to understand that giving money effectively requires it's not just do good and be a nice person. It's also making sure that when you do good and you are a nice person, that you do it, so then it actually makes a difference beyond just handing somebody a $100 bill on a street corner. It's got to have more than that. The political, you have to understand that there is a political context to a lot of philanthropic giving. And that bridge, for instance, was and to some extent continues to have a political aspect to it. And that means that the decision making may not be the way we always want it to go, but we take and do what we can and try to cover. Let's try to get 60 or 70%. And if we do that, we've done really well. There's a message in that to other people down in Washington. They could do a little bit of a dose of that. And then, of course, the managerial. You know, we have an endowment. We have about almost $300 million in endowment. We've got to give away 5% of it. We give actually a little bit more than that. But we have a whole chain of commitments going out, some of them going out several years. Some of them are immediate, and we have to budget for that. We have to track it. We have to follow up on it. We've got to make sure that the checks were sent out. We've got to make sure that the follow-up with the organizations, are they spent it right, that they got the audit, that they didn't waste it, that they put it to what we said we wanted it to go to, or that they put it to what they said they wanted it to go to. So even the foundation takes a range of managerial and leadership talents. Now, I'm going to tell you, there is a managerial aspect to this. If you get, before you initiate something, and get everything set up so that then everything goes 100% correct, and you have everything under control, I can guarantee you are absolutely not going fast enough. And that's true in almost every project endeavor that I've ever been involved in. I'll give you a perfect example. We just dug, I don't know, you all been on the campus, you saw the big construction job we got going through the campus. I mean, we're tearing the hell out of this place. I mean, there's the field house that we built in, when did we build the field house? Tim, when did we build the field house? 76. I mean, that field house really hasn't been gone through since 1976. I can guarantee you should see what they're doing. I mean, it's going to be great. But we got into a lot of stuff, and we didn't have it 100%. We didn't have it 100%. You'll never get it 100%. If you seek to get it 100%, you'll never get there. And not only that, what you find is, like I found with PDH, and what I found with the race team, and what I found with the foundation and building that bridge, and a whole lot of stuff in my businesses, the fact that you don't have it 100% leads to some other interesting implications. And all of a sudden, you're doing something, and you say, wait a minute, hold on, we were going to go this way, let's just branch it off a little. Let's just skew it a little. And all of a sudden, you created something even better because you weren't ossified into making sure you had 100%. And this is one of the biggest things that I see holding back management in total, in even big companies, to try to get 100%. And he knew how to go fast enough, too. Do we have a clip on this? fueler moves that, now they go. The rule is that you got to get the fueling done before you can do anything on the car. God, that's cool. There's nothing like car racing. I drove for 35 years. I started in a Datsun 510. And what I found early on, I was a garage kid. I did okay in school, but I was a garage kid. I'd rather spend time with my head under the hood of a car than a whole lot of other things. And it was kind of a natural outgrowth of me taking a muffler off the lawnmower because it made the lawnmower go faster, so then I could cut the grass sooner, so then I could get into my go-kart and go traveling around the streets. I bought a car when I was 13, a Model A Ford, and took it apart and found that I only had a few parts left over when I put it back together. The big thing about this is managing chaos. That's absolutely correct. It is a very high-powered, tight, constrained environment. How many people have been to car races, seen car races, watched them, or anything like that? What kind of racing have you all seen? Give me an example. NASCAR, yeah. F1, yeah, good. Yeah, Alonso did a good job last week, didn't he? Who was it? Did Busch win last weekend? Kurt Busch win? Come on, NASCAR fans, did Kurt Busch win? I don't know, I thought it was Kurt Busch. Anyway, when you see that, when they're on the racetrack, believe me, that is the result of all of what you had to do before. I never forget taking my mother to, I moved my car out of the garage at the farmhouse, and I moved it into an actual shop that was on Smith Street. We were running a Porsche 962 then, and my mother came in and said, "Where's the car?" And I said, "You're standing right next to it." What she was standing next to was the fuselage that the driver sat in, but that's all it was. And that's what it is. It's this, it's preparation and preparation. Sounds like a lot of things, doesn't it? Preparation. You know, if you're getting into an athletic event, if you're going to run a triathlon, by golly, you're going to prepare for it. If you're going to do a presentation to the boss about a new tech system that you want to put in that'll make it go faster or lower cost or enable you to get more information faster, you're going to prepare. Or at least you better. And in racing, as in business and really kind of in a lot of things in life, you got to prepare. You know, it's that, what is it? Poor preparation leads to piss poor performance. Isn't that what it is? That's absolutely right. And in racing, not only could you not win races or even do well, somebody could get really badly hurt. So when I started working on my cars and then had a couple guys start with me and preparation. Then as we got more sophisticated, we had to do development and testing. That's where you guys come in. What we're doing now with our cars, that car you saw, this Mazda-powered prototype, this car here, the level of technology and the level of input, technological input that we need to run this car effectively is astounding. We measure 300 different characteristics of this car while it's running on the racetrack. You name it, we measure it, real time. But I'm going to tell you something. All of those statistics are meaningless unless they're arrayed correctly. It's just meaningless. It is such a staggering amount of information coming at you so fast, especially in testing, when we add even more stuff because we added aerodynamic pieces to check a whole lot of things, not only the drag, but also airspeeds, for instance, in the scoops to get the air right. And they all do this. The NASCAR guys do it. F1, they run wind tunnels and full-scale wind tunnels 24/7 to test the slightest change to see if they can make the car go quicker. And by golly, they prepare those cars, but by golly, they do a lot of development and testing. And this is true of a lot of things when you're going to do. I have a company that makes product for the gas appliance industry. Cooktops, ovens, stoves, and for water heaters and gas dryers. We do it worldwide. I want to tell you, preparation, and development. We got to make damn sure that none of this stuff is going to do what we don't want it to do, which is primarily, well, explode for one, but we don't want it to cause fires. We want it to work effectively. When you turn the valve on, it goes. And the amount of testing and development is staggering. But the same thing applies in racing as it does to gas appliances or doing refrigerators for recreational vehicles or building large flagpoles, aluminum flagpoles. The same thing applies. You can do the preparation and the development and the testing, but by golly, you got to get it done. There's no 100%. You've got to get it done. And that's where this comes in. After a while, it's, guys, we're doing it. That's when that comes in. But the operational part is logistical. It's all dealing with statistics. It's dealing with all of the nuts, literally nuts and bolts, but also the nuts and bolts of arraying all that information. And it's also making sure that when the car comes in and it goes out with 4 wheels, full fuel, and a driver that's strapped in, and hopefully the driver remembers when he gets in to plug his radio in. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. Then they have a problem with me because they didn't do the preparation. The drivers didn't do the preparation. And then all the managerial stuff is just all of the things related to costs and all the allocating resources to things. We're now developing an engine for Mazda. And we're working in conjunction with another organization. And we're dealing with them. They're paying for it. So we have to be good stewards of their money. Because it's a lot of money, and we got to make sure that the output at the end of the day works. But it's not going to work 100% the first time, but by golly, it's going to work to do the job that we want. It may not go the mileage that we want, but it's going to go the speed. It may not have the fuel economy, but it's going to be close. But we're not going to be 100% of their spec first. And we told them that. But we'll get there. But the only way you're going to get there is by getting it on the racetrack. Warren Bennis is a very important thinker about business. Y'all think he's right? I mean, you think that's about right? You guys think you have any input in doing that? I mean, seriously, do you? Do you all feel in your job, in your role, with your organization, are you helping that process? Do you all feel that way? Because I'm going to tell you something. I rely on the CIOs at every one of our companies to have a lot of input as to how we're going and how we're moving into the future. And if you're not, demand it. Because you guys have more to offer than a lot of other people. And we'll get to some of the thoughts I've got about you guys in a minute. All right, Stevie. These are the companies. Actually, we've got a lot of subsets here, different products and subsets. One of the things, Plaid is a company that makes creative products. Paints, brushes, stencils, kits, Paint by numbers, we do a lot of different things with different types of paints. We do a lot of different kits. Of all the companies we've got, that's probably the closest to, or certain aspects of it are closest to a radio station where you've got to herd the creative people to first get an idea, make it practical, design it, find out whether we build it or whether we vendor it out, and then how we're going to market it. But it's got to be done, it's got to be done quick. 30% of Plaid's products every year, 30% of Plaid's products don't sell the next year. So if you think a product life cycle is important, an aluminum pole, like HAPCO makes, or an aluminum flagpole, there's a life cycle on it only because you've got to make sure that the specs for aluminum poles remain, that they fill in with building codes and that kind of thing. But the state of the art of an aluminum pole doesn't change much. 30% of Plaid. 30% disappears every year. So these guys are constantly cooking, and that's the thing. And do they make mistakes? Oh, God, you betcha. But the idea is to make sure that you minimize your mistakes and maximize your pluses. Now, Kodo actually helps you guys. Kodo is the largest supplier of certain types of relays that go into automated testing equipment. And what they automate and test are semiconductors. And we sell to Agilent and Teledyne and a few others. And they're the guys that put the testing equipment that every time a new chip comes out, they build a new, and it runs these very sophisticated, and you all know more about that than I do, but these very sophisticated systems that are done in these little micro pieces, and Kodo is a part of that. Tri-City Extrusion is an interesting company. Does anybody know what extrusion means? If you take you all know what that means? Okay. But those of you that don't, if you have kids and they have Play-Doh, Play-Doh has these little things where you can take the Play-Doh and kind of mush it through a form. It's a star or a square or a triangle, and you end up with a star or a square triangle form. Well, that's extruding. Only we do it with a press. One of our presses can press 3,500 tons of pressure and builds very huge tubular and structural products for anything from doors on aircraft hangars that are big, long doors, and they've got to be fairly light. We do some defense work, although not much, and I'm glad we don't do much for a lot of reasons. But the other thing is that we do small stuff, like stuff for aluminum doors and things like that. But the key to this thing is that we have all, we flip that, the diversity of manufacturing, and incidentally, manufacturing is tough and getting tougher. It's getting tougher because people are chasing labor rates all around the world. The cost of capital is now getting harder and steeper. And the biggest thing that we've got to do is we've got to make sure that this managerial, operational part is a careful steward of money that we owe to a lot of people. Not only a payroll, but our banks, finance companies, and our customers. And the creative part, actually, we are now creating two different types of aluminum poles. We've got a new aluminum pole set up. One of the characteristics of a high pole is a harmonic that can develop in the wind. We've developed a new internal dampening system, which keeps the pole from wobbling, and it's now going to be the industry standard. We've got a patent on it, and we're going to sell the ability of other people to make these poles. We're going to sell it to them. So there was a creative part. But all the engineering and the creative stuff all went to something that we had to come up with. In other words, ultimately, you got to get there. And my job, in part, is to say, get there, and then when we get there, good, let's go. And sometimes it doesn't always work. But that's true of, as I pointed out earlier, kind of everything. Go ahead, Stevie. Here's the biggest issue. You know, I spend most of my time on personnel issues. And the biggest issue is, and for you guys, if you run your departments, like Bill does, run his department, succession planning. The best managers plan for the time when they go. The best managers plan for the time that they're going to go. The best ones. Why? Because they develop people that really are committed to their effort. And it takes training. You got to make sure that your people underneath are getting trained. If you're running the department, you have to delegate. You cannot do it all yourself. You know, there is no such thing as a self-made manager. We all got to where we are because of somebody else. You believe that? Does everybody believe that? Do you understand that? Look, we all bust our ass. I understand that. But we got there because of some other people saying, hey, this guy's good, let's move him up. This lady knows her stuff, let's move her up. But the biggest thing is you got to delegate. And then you can't give people, I love it when I once in a while when I promote a guy, I hired a guy just recently to run HAPCO because our other guy retired. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you, you're going to have all the responsibility for this business, but not much of the authority. I meant it jokingly. You can't have one without the other. If you're going to delegate to somebody, you've got to give them the authority to do it. Now, you can put limits on them, of course, but you've got to do that. So the biggest thing that I've found is succession planning is all of this. You've got to train people. You've got to make sure that they're trained. You've got to make sure you delegate to them progressively more important things, and you've got to make sure that they have the ability to do their job. Now, my race team is a perfect example. All of our guys are committed, and all of them are empowered to do their job. That goes from the most important guy on the team. Take a guess who is the most important guy on a race team. Anybody want to guess? Guess. Somebody out there, guess who's the most important guy on a race team? Oh, that's one example. Okay, what else? Speak up now, I'm a little hard of hearing. The what? Pit chief, okay, who else? Crew chief, yeah, he's important, yeah. You want me to tell you the most important guy? I'll tell you the most important guy on a race team. The truck driver. Where's the car? All right, Stevie. Here it is, guys. God help us. This is what it is. When you don't exercise managerial leadership and make decisions, this is what it amounts to. This is what it amounts to. You got to make decisions, because if you don't, everything gets sloppy. This is what happened to countless companies. I mean, think of them. You can name dozens of companies that people were promoted or were moved or put in a position where they either didn't have the authority or the responsibility to do their job, Their promotions was dependent on how many people were in their department. Their budget was give them 3% extra because we've always done it that way. It's any number of these things. And lost opportunities. Now look, you're always going to have lost opportunities. You can't catch all of the trains. You can't grasp everything. But if you're not doing a lot of the things that you got to do to make a business work, you'll miss a lot more opportunities. And then you fail. You may not fail overnight. There are a lot of businesses that just stumbled along and all of a sudden, hey, we're out of here. I mean, the economic history of this country is littered with companies that didn't have the right leadership. They weren't on the edge of their seat, and it starts at the top, I will tell you. It starts at the top. If the head man is more worried about whether he's going to have the ability to have his wife use the corporate jet than he is to worried about whether the shipping department has the right material to make sure that the stuff is packed right so when it gets shipped it doesn't get damaged so we don't get returns. And that happens. I am telling you it happens. Guys are more, senior level management are more interested in where they're going to go, what jet they're going to take to go fishing. And I'm not kidding. I've seen it. I bought businesses from those guys. I've seen liquidations where I bought stuff from guys that were doing that. And it starts at the top. And the top has to encompass all those forms of leadership that we talked about earlier. But everybody else has to have the same level of it too. Now, there's a political context, I will admit, to almost any decision that's made in an organization. The thing is, you got to minimize that bullshit. You really got to minimize that. If you're running your department, make sure you're not playing. You got to, especially with your people, but especially as you move up, you got to make sure that you're straight and bang the work out. All right, Stevie. Now here we talk about you guys. Our race team now, when I started the race team, it was me and my wife. Because it was a Datsun 510, it had carburetors, a 5-speed gearbox, a distributor, a fuel pump, an electric fuel pump, which doesn't work, by the way, when you run out of gas. And now, we have an absolute demand on a race team and every one of my businesses for almost instant information. Because information drives decisions. That's where you guys come in. It's got to be presented. You see how it's written up. It's got to be done so that then people can understand it. The most effective, there were a couple of books that were published in the 70s, which I'm surprised, I don't know whether they're still in print. It was written by a guy whose name I forget, but I've got both books. And it was the graphic, it was 2 volumes, the graphic presentation of quantitative information. Anybody heard of that book? What's that? That's right. Well, it was a self-published book. He put this thing out on himself, and you could go. I mean, in those days, I don't even know it was an 800 number. I think you had to mail him a note. But think about how it is. Look, let me give you an example. One of the things he pointed out was the train schedule for the Metro-North Railroad. How effective, how incredible complex information is conveyed so easily and made it so easy to understand. That's what you guys have to make sure happens. You guys have to make sure that that happens. And it's got to be done at low cost. And let me tell you, as you guys have found, in your area, like I do mine, it isn't necessarily the hardware. Hardware helps. You can't have somebody trying to drive a railroad spike with a tack hammer. But at the same time, you don't need a Rolls Royce to necessarily go down and get the morning newspaper or to get to your work. So it's people coupled with the hardware to make sure you can do it. And this is where you guys are. Because by golly, we can't race cars, we can't build product, we can't finance stuff without an intense IT effort. You guys face innumerable challenges. The biggest thing that I see with you guys is how to meld all the technologies that's available. I mean, I've got a cell phone and a BlackBerry, and I barely know how to use either one. And I'm not proud of that, but I mean, it's just, you know, you got to go with your strengths. But the need for obtaining and getting and arraying and delivering quantitative information is so important nowadays. And the use of technology, people are now starting to embrace it. Let me give you a good example. Down at our HAPCO plant, making these poles takes a machine that's probably, depending on how long a pole you're making, these are huge spinners. And the run out on these poles, they're tapered. They take a cylinder, an extruded cylinder of aluminum, and they spin it to make it that at the top, the wall thickness of the tube is thinner than at the base. Easy concept to understand, right? Well, the spinner is a unit that spins. It has a mandrel underneath, which runs inside, and then it's got these spinners that roll along and kind of squish the aluminum in a pace and in a speed, not only rotational speed, but a feed going out that's very, very precise. 8 years ago, it was done by individuals who had done it so many times that they just knew it was working. And by golly, they were pretty much right, but it was entirely manual. It was screws, and there were no digital anything. There was no digital feeds. There was no specs. We had an engineer came up with the idea of saying, look, we've got to put some technology behind this. So we installed digital readouts and digital setups to set it up, so then we started to quantify the actual methodology that had to be used. And we installed this. Well, the guys that were operators that had been spinning these poles, one guy, believe it or not, had been spinning these poles on his own at the company for 28 years. And when he heard about this thing, you know what he said? Take a guess what he said. What do you think he said? That's a common refrain, right? You know what this guy said? He said the same thing that Stan Musial said when they started bringing blacks into baseball. When African Americans were starting to be brought into baseball. Stan Musial, everybody know him? St. Louis Cardinals? Stan Musial, probably one of the greatest baseball players in baseball history. The leader of the team, you know what he said? He said, if they can play baseball and help us win ball games, bring everybody on. That's what this guy did. He was our Stan Musial. He said, you know, let's try it. Let's see if it can make it work. He was the guy. Talk about leadership. This guy on the line said, I'm going to be your first guy to do it. I don't know whether it's going to work or not, but I want to try it. And you know what he told me later on? He said, I'll tell you why I did that. I wanted to make sure that if it didn't work, I knew about it first. And if it did work, I knew how to operate it first. Huh? That's Stan Musial. I want to win ball games. Help me out. This guy wanted to win ball games. And what is it? It's a guy engineering, implementing technology. That's what you guys do. The only problem that I have kind of worldwide is how governments seem to not really get it. I think they're starting to get it. They need to get it more, is embracing technology to understand what's going on with all of their numbers. Think about the huge amount of data related to all of us. I mean, take a look at our healthcare plans. Take a look at our payroll. Take a look at all this stuff. I mean, we do it in business. We do it. I mean, who writes out checks anymore? I mean, think about it. It's all technology, and you guys are responsible for it. But governments somehow haven't quite embraced it. I'm not quite sure why. They're starting to, but not much. But you guys are the leading edge of making everything else work. And I'm not saying that because that's what you guys do. I mean, I'd say this especially if I was dealing with a bunch of operating guys, or if I was dealing with a bunch of marketing guys. Talk about people that do not embrace technology, or sales and marketing guys. They don't. They have the hardest time. They have the hardest time understanding technology, using technology. But I would say the same thing, that you've got to have a good CIO. You've got to have a good IT component in every single business. And that's where you guys are. You guys are more important than you ever believed. And I'm telling you because I am a consumer of data that's arrayed by somebody else. And I don't even know how these guys do it. I don't know how you all do it. That's where the sorcerer part comes in. I mean, I have enormous respect for you guys' ability. When I was in grad school, 1972 at Cornell University, we were using Hollerith cards to do computer programming and Computer Programming 101. Hollerith cards. I mean, there were engineering guys that were walking in, senior level engineering, especially senior level engineering students, that were rolling in pull carts, industrial pull carts, literally filled with these Hollerith cards, stacked this high on this thing. I'll bet some of those guys, when they fed into the computer, I'll bet they had a ton of paper. And I sat back and said, there is no way I'm going to master this. I'm glad somebody else is. I mean, it was before the PC. I remember when HP came out with this new handheld thing. The calculator that I had, I used a slide rule. I still do, as a matter of fact. But the calculator, I bought a Bowmar calculator. Anybody remember the Bowmar calculators? Yeah. I see a lot of gray hair that says that. But the Bowmar calculator came out, and what could it do? Not really much. Not very much, and it cost me like $150. I mean, I've got a thing on my desk. I bought a Radio Shack for like $15. It's solar powered. It does 5 times more than that Bowmar thing that had a battery, but you had to plug it in or the battery would die. And that's where you guys come in, because you guys keep up with the technology. And I've got news for you. Senior level management, even junior level management cannot keep up with technology. You guys can. You guys can. And in every business, everywhere, somebody has a question that relates to stuff that you guys absolutely know. The key to that is make sure that everybody knows that you're available to help them out. That's the key. Now, the final thing is because of this, you guys now have a burden because of your importance and your significance. You have a burden. You have a burden to lead. You're not staff anymore, folks. You're leaders. That means that you've got to do all of the things that these guys are talking about. All the things, all of these areas. And if you don't believe it, just think about what happens to a company when they don't have what you guys do. Think about it. What are you going to do? You're going to pencil a piece of paper? I mean, I use a pencil to a piece of paper. But I mean, you know, what happens if the Excel spreadsheet doesn't show up? You're doing a sale leaseback on anything. What's the run rate? What's the depreciation against the cost of it? And how does it fit in with your financing? It all comes down to technology. It all comes down to what you guys do.